Mae Krier, an original Rosie the Riveter, was born in 1926 in North Dakota. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, Mae, her sister, and a friend headed to Seattle, Washington, where Mae became a riveter for Boeing, making B-17s and B-29s for 92 cents an hour. She met Norm, her late husband, a sailor, on the dance floor in 1944. Norm was transferred to Pasco, Washington, and in April 1945 they married. She left Boeing to work for the Army engineers with Italian prisoners of war in Pasco at 83 cents an hour. Eventually they settled in Pennsylvania, where they raised their 2 children and where Mae still resides today. Mae joined other Rosies to get the first National Rosie the Riveter Day in 2017 and the Congressional Gold Medal for Rosie in 2020. During the pandemic, through her Facebook page, Honor Rosie, Mae, with the help of companies, groups, and individuals, made and mailed well over 6,000 red and white polka dot face masks. 5,000 went directly to her Honor Rosie followers. In 2022, her face mask and bandana were worn by Rosie the Rocketeer in the commander's seat of the Boeing Starliner, which traveled to the International Space Station and back. Mae continues to travel the world to promote Rosie the Riveter's legacy, and at 98 years, Mae still cuts her own grass. Now it's time to join Breaking Barriers with Mae Krier. Hi, Mae.
Hi, Deb. How are you this morning?
I'm good.
I see we have a nice guest on this morning.
We certainly do. Mae and I were talking about this yesterday, how happy we are to bring different people on our show to promote them and for people to learn all the things you don't read in the history books. And this is one of those programs. We're excited to talk to Pia Marie Winters Jordan, who is the author of the book Memories of a Tuskegee Airman Nurse and Her Military Sisters. So let's welcome Pia.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi,
Thanks for
welcome.
being on.
You're welcome.
We're so happy to have you tell our story. It's so important.
All right. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to talking about the nurses.
That's great. So your book focuses on 1942 to 1946 during World War II, when the Army Nurse Corps staffed the station hospital on the base where the Tuskegee Airmen were trained, correct?
Correct.
And correct me if I say anything wrong.
I will.
Where was this base at? Where was it located?
The base was located in Tuskegee, Alabama, which is, of course, in the state of Alabama. And you can imagine it was not necessarily a welcoming environment for African-American personnel.
Right.
The residents, I think, were uneasy having them there.
So is that why the staff was African-American?
Definitely. Okay. Although actually initially the personnel there, the ones who were training were white. But then later on, there were some African-American personnel who would come on and do training and all. But basically, the higher ups were white officers.
Okay. I didn't realize that Tuskegee Airmen had a hospital exclusively for them.
Well, this was an Army base. Right. So just like any other Army base, there was a hospital. And you're right. This was a base just to train African-American men to fly military planes, because in 1925, there was a report that said African-American men were not smart enough to be officers. And to be a pilot, you have to be an officer. So this was an opportunity with World War II coming, that there were groups throughout the country who are pushing to have professional personnel in the military who were African American. And even the nurses, you couldn't be in the Army Nurse Corps before World War II if you were African American. There were no Black nurses allowed.
So when did that change that they became nurses?
All right, in 1941, to get into the Army Nurse Corps, you had to join the American Red Cross. Well,
wow.
The nurses, there was one nurse, her name was Della Rainey, and she tried to join the American Red Cross, and she couldn't because she was Black. So what she did, she wrote a letter to the higher ups in the American Red Cross saying she wanted to serve her country and to allow her to be included. So she was accepted in 1941. And so that opened the door for other nurses. However, initially there was a quota for African American nurses. They were only allowed about 56 of them who were allowed to come in initially.
Okay. Well, how many nurses ended up being stationed there?
28 nurses were stationed at Tuskegee Army Airfield. And keep in mind, to be in the Army Nurse Corps, you had to have graduated from nursing school and you had to be a registered nurse. So these were professional nurses. These women had done all they needed to do to be accepted into the Army Nurse Corps.
Were they sent into military training or into the war zones or anything after their training?
Well, no, these nurses, they were stateside. They were in, actually, though, I have to say there were about 3 nurses who eventually were stationed in England. But basically, these 28 nurses at this point in time, between 1941 and 46, except for the 3 who went to England, they were stateside. So the training, they did have some sort of basic training, but they went in as lieutenants in the Army Nurse Corps. And so they would have like their own boot camp or hiking or whatever, just the basics to prepare them for their assignment there.
Are you saying that they were only allowed to treat the colored?
Correct.
Is that,
These nurses, and that's another thing, these nurses were only allowed to be on bases where they were treating African American men or Negro men or colored men, however the terminology you use, and German prisoners and possibly Italian prisoners. So they were those were their the people that they handled, except on the base. You had the personnel on the base, but more than likely the white personnel would go to the VA hospital that was in Tuskegee.
Can you imagine if you're a wounded soldier, would you care whether you're black or white? Or somebody take care of you? Would it matter? Isn't that amazing?
Yes, and because there were Jim Crow laws, the laws that said African Americans couldn't go to certain hospitals, they could go to black hospitals. And May, I want to mention something. When I was growing up, my grandfather called us colored people. And then when my mother, she was born in 1920, but in the 40s, and so they would say, or 50s, Negroes. And then in the 60s, it became African American or Black or African American. And so in the future, I don't know what will be called.
I'm always afraid I'm going to use the wrong name or call you the wrong thing. I mean, it's just natural for me to enjoy your teachers. It doesn't matter to me. And this seems so funny because I never know whether I'm saying the right thing.
I think a lot of us don't know, even as I was growing up. It's like, because keep in mind, as you can see, I'm a light-skinned African American person, and my mother was light-skinned. So it could be, we could be confused that we were Caucasian, we're white. And I can tell you some things. Probably my mother was able to walk around Tuskegee and other bases when she was assigned to other bases in the North, because people didn't realize that she was African American because she was so light.
Well, I'm glad you brought your mom up, because this is a very special book, because your mom was one of the nurses, right?
Right. And if you look over my right shoulder, see the woman in the front?
Mm-hmm.
That's
And we're going to show another, we're going to show that again.
Okay, but let me mention too, see the woman, I'm kind of moving to her left. That was Della Rainey, the one who became the first African American in the Army Nurse Corps during World War II.
Okay, okay. Brandy, can you put up the first picture, which is your mom and your book cover? There you go.
Oh, you know what?
It's beautiful.
That picture is my family's favorite. Like her sister's brother, that picture has gone down through the decades as being the favorite family picture. And basically the picture underneath, those were the nurses when they were in their formal uniforms, but that doesn't show all of the 28 nurses, because keep in mind, nurses at any one time, there were 20 nurses, Black nurses on that base. So there were 28 total, but nurses were coming and going, and nurses got married and whatever, or left the service. So, but basically I was able to document 28 of them.
Okay.
And your mother still alive? I assume your mother isn't alive. Is that correct?
No, she died in 2011. And my book came out last year in 2023, July, actually my son's birthday, July 15th, 2023. And so I don't know if I should mention this now, but if anybody, you can go on Amazon, other online places. You might check your local bookstore for a book, your local library, or ugapress.org, because the book is sponsored by the University of Georgia Press. Oh, and I see you have a scroll underneath. I'm so impressed about the book.
So let me say the title, because Brandy tells me I have to remember people who aren't watching but listening.
Right.
The name of the book is Memories of a Tuskegee Airman Nurse and Her Military Sisters. The author is Pia Marie Winter Jordan.
Right.
So thanks, Brandy. You can take that one down. So, Pia, what made you decide to write this book?
Well, I decided to write this book because my mother in 2006, she became ill. My father had died by then, a couple decades earlier. And so she moved closer to me from a single family home into a senior citizen facility as an independent. But what happened is she became ill, and she ended up going from independent to a nursing home. There was not that in between, unfortunately. So I'm her only child. And so I had to end up cleaning out her apartment with the help of one of my cousins. But as the days went on and I was looking through her things, I found this scrapbook. And on the outside, it said Tuskegee Army Flying School. Now, I had seen that scrapbook growing up. I really had. But, it was just interesting little pages. It kind of, like went over my head. Like, okay, was this when you were in nursing school or in the military or what? So I didn't pay much attention to it. But as an adult, I started looking at it and I'm going, oh my goodness, my mother served with the Tuskegee Airmen. Now, what I have to do sometimes when I'm doing presentations is letting people know who the Tuskegee Airmen are, because some people have never heard of them. Exactly. And like I said before, it was an experience, back then they call it experiment, but we have to separate that term experiment because there were an experiment in Tuskegee that wasn't positive.
Right.
The syphilis study, this has nothing to do with that. I want to make that clear because some people, they were saying, well, these nurses, why did they do? No, they had nothing to do with that study. Mm-hmm. So the fact that this was an experience to see if African-American men were smart enough, could learn how to fly military planes. So that is the basis. When I tell people about the story, what was happening, it was Jim Crow laws that African-American people didn't have rights. You know, they couldn't do certain things. They were, even in the military, basically, you could dig holes, the men could dig holes for latrines, cook, they could be cooks. So it wasn't professional. The Black doctors, Black nurses, Black lawyers were not included. So this was an opportunity where the door was opening, that at least in the military, there was integration, because civilian hospitals, if you're Black, basically you couldn't work in a civilian hospital. You could work in a Black hospital, but not so much civilian hospital. And I'll have to say, just to mention, 4 of these nurses were graduates of St. Philip Hospital School of Nursing in Richmond, Virginia. And that was under the Medical College of Virginia. Now, that was a white institution, but St. Philip Hospital was a Black hospital. So they needed to train nurses to take care of the patients and provide patient services there. So that school, that college, was open to African-American women to basically, because there was a need, because they couldn't let white nurses take care of the Black patients. So I wanted to mention that 4 of those nurses, they did graduate from the same school.
Now, and none of them were whack or waves, right, up here? Were any of them allowed to whack or wave during the war?
Were they whacks or waves?
No, these were in the Army Nurse Corps, ANC.
So that's different.
Yeah, they weren't allowed to do. They weren't allowed to do the, like I said, the whacks and the waves. They weren't allowed into the Corps, their Corps.
Oh, well, the Army Air Corps. Well, the Air Force hadn't started yet. The Navy, the Navy nursing, they didn't allow Black nurses in the what is it? The Navy, the Nurses Navy Corps until I believe it was around 1948, 40, or maybe 1945-ish, 46s. But basically, the door was kind of closed to that point in the 40s and 41 until Della Rainey, opened the door for the nurses who were going in the Army Air Corps, the Army Nurse Corps. But what happened is when Della Rainey, well, I'm sorry, you were asking me about my mother. So my mother became ill. I was looking through her things. She, looking through that scrapbook, I'm going, oh my goodness, my mother was with the Tuskegee Airmen. And so what happened is I went from working in broadcast news to teaching it at Morgan State University in Baltimore County, which is a historically Black college university. And I taught multimedia journalism. Well, one of my colleagues, I was telling her one day, and this was 2 years after my mother had become ill and she was in a nursing home. I told my colleague, I feel so bad. Here I am, a journalist, and my mother was in the Tuskegee, she was in Tuskegee in the Army Nurse Corps, and I never did anything about it. I worked in the business, but I never did anything. So she said, well, start now. And I'm like, okay. And so she said, and you know what you have to do first? I said, got to get the interviews, because they're in their late 80s, their 90s now. And so I went literally all over the country interviewing. Fortunately, one of the nurses who was married to one of the first 4 Tuskegee Airmen who graduated, she and my mother were close friends. We even traveled overseas together. And so she was in California. Another nurse I'd never met was in New Jersey at that time. And then, of course, there was my mother. So I'm going to all these locations, New Jersey, California, Maryland. I'm also going to the archives at Maxwell Air Force Base. They have the, that's the was it repository for the Tuskegee Airmen history. That's there in Montgomery, Alabama. I went to the United States, what is it, where we keep all our stuff.
Library of Congress?
No, not the Congress, but oh goodness, I don't know why my mind is just going.
National Archives.
Yes, I went to the National Archives 1 and 2, one in DC, the one in College Park, Maryland, and I have to say go Terps because I'm a University of Maryland graduate. So anyway, I digress. So I said, okay, I did all that. I went all around the country. I got all this information. My goal was to do a documentary about these nurses. So years have gone by. I taught at Morgan about 10 years. And I hadn't, because I was trying to do everything myself. And fortunately, there was a woman who had gotten a couple of people who had gotten information about some of the nurses and shared it with me. And one of the pictures in my mother's scrapbook, I couldn't identify the woman, but one woman found out, some children of Tuskegee Airmen, I found out who this woman was. And so I had information, at least a little bit of information on each of the 28 nurses.
Excuse me 1 minute. Brandy, put up the second picture, please. And this will be the nurses.
Okay, and I'll take a little drink. Yeah, that's the one behind me.
Yep, that's the one behind you, but this is bigger for us to see.
Right. And so as you see, my mother, see, I'm facing this. So, well, I guess you can see the light-skinned woman in the front.
On the left. Yep.
On the left. Okay, good. I'm seeing in the right way. And then the Della Rainey, they called her Ma Rainey. She was the principal chief nurse at Tuskegee. And so let's see, what else? Where was I? So anyway, I did all that work. I got all the information about the documentary. And then I said, oh, let me start writing a radio documentary, a television documentary. I said, okay, I'll do a book proposal and see if any publishers are interested. Guess what? A publisher was interested.
Great.
Which meant I had to write a book. Mm-hmm. I was planning to do it. I'm in broadcast news. I'm used to writing scripts. So now I need to write the book. Now I've kind of been playing around if I were to write a book, how I would work it. So I took a year to work on the book. So I had to stop doing anything dealing with video and documentary. So I took a year to write the book. They accepted it. Actually, the publisher at that time was New South Books. Now there are what's called an imprint of the University of Georgia Press. So during the time when I wrote the book, got contracted by them, they went under the University of Georgia Press. So I was working basically with the University of Georgia Press at that time. And so since then, I got the information, but it was because of my colleague who now she's at the University of Southern California, Professor Alyssa Hostin Richardson. So what I've been doing since then kind of put the documentary on the back burner, but I'm hoping, to start it up again, to start working on it. But I've been, doing presentations like what we're doing, like talking to you all now, doing interviews, radio interviews, television interviews, podcasts. And then I've been going live because even in Florida, one of the museums had me speak. One of the bookstores had me speak. I'm going to be doing something actually in Alabama in February. And I'm going to be doing a virtual, like we're doing now, for the Daughters of the American Revolution in Wisconsin in February. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to be in Maryland and March for Women's History Month at the the College Park Aviation Museum. So it's keeping me really busy. Oh, and also the local chapter of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History this November, and we're in 2024. They are having me come in and present to them.
So tell me, so your mom never talked about this?
Basically, if she said anything, or I might have overheard her talking on the phone to her former sisters in the military. But you know what? When I talked to other children of Tuskegee Airmen and of the nurses, they were just mom and dad to us. It was like we were not really paying a lot of attention. And I have to say, I'm sorry about that. I don't know if it was because during that period, it was probably very hurtful during Jim Crow to imagine you're in a town where the people don't want you. You're in a country where you're a second, third, fourth class citizen. So that might have been the reason, because keep in mind, even though the Tuskegee Airmen were in training in the 40s, that term Tuskegee Airmen didn't get coined until the 1950s when someone wrote a book about them. And then in recent decades, you see a documentary, you see movies about them, but they were just trying to serve their country in a way in which giving them an opportunity to be pilots. Now, I need to share this with you. The men were pilot cadets during the 1940s. They had no rank. The nurses were lieutenants. They came in as lieutenants in the Army Nurse Corps. So the men who became known as the Tuskegee Airmen, they had to salute them. And I interviewed some of them who knew my mother. And so you'll have to tell all your viewers, they have to get the book if they want to hear the stories about it.
Will do. Well, so Mae, you had a similar kind of thing. You didn't talk about what you did in the war until your kids were, in high school, right?
Oh yes, they were. In fact, they were in college almost. It's been 40 or 50 years ago when I began working to see that the American women were recognized. For Rosie Riveter was recognized, and I fought hard for the women, and we ended up with the Congressional Gold Medal, and that's so rewarding. And this week I was in Washington, and they told the story again and had me up on the stage. Of course, I love that. I'm waving. But, it's so rewarding. You're answering all of the questions that I have to ask you. You're answering before I ask. But, there's
no, it's okay.
No, I'm glad. But there's no substitute for working hard,
I was
go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned that your kids probably didn't become more interested, or you talk about it when you were in high school. Actually, when my son was in high school, I had mentioned, I guess, that my mother was in the military. And so his high school history teacher wanted my mother to come in to speak, but my mother was rather reluctant to do that. She's not one that's going to be out there speaking. She's more of a behind the scenes kind of person. So, back and then how they had those VHS cameras, those with the big little cassettes that you put in this camera. Well, I took.
Don't forget, after World War II, the people didn't talk about it for years. I mean, we're hearing more about the veterans of World War II now than we did after the war. I guess I'm just so glad to have it over. In the meantime, I've met some of your men, your Tuskegee Airmen, and I met Captain McGee in Washington, which I loved. I mean, his family's got a beautiful family. And, this is so nice when you can get together and be normal people together. I like that. But, like I said, Pia, there's no substitute for working hard and just never giving up. And I love the way you're talking about your mom. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, I'm just sorry that she didn't live long enough to even see that I was working on a book. Now, I did make a a shadow box with her picture and her medals and her uniform pins. Like I said, and I used that when I videotaped her for my son's high school teacher. But I had never, to really look into, the nurses and what they were doing and the problems they had even getting in to the military at that time.
So, Brandy, could you put up?
I'm sorry, Deb. Go ahead.
Let's do the third picture because this shows other staff. So tell us about these people.
Okay, now some of them I was trying to figure out who everyone is, but the women, all the women there, they were the nurses. I believe this is the last group of nurses who were stationed on the base because there's about 5 or 6 left after they started closing down that base. And the man, fourth from the left, he was the commander or the chief in charge of the station hospital and colonel. And of course, I should have reviewed this. Oh, goodness. Colonel Cummings. So he was head of all of them. And then in that picture, I believe there's the dentist, people who served in different capacities, because on that base, they had to deal with dentistry, medical, surgical. So I believe these are the last people who in 1946 who were there before that base was disbanded.
Okay, thanks, Brandy. So
up here, this weekend I traveled with are you familiar with the Buffalo Soldiers?
Yes, and I have someone you might want on your show because they study in Maryland about the Buffalo Soldiers and they do reenactments. I got a couple people who do reenactments.
Well, James Thompson and his wife Maria, we traveled together to Washington, and he spoke too. And I told Deb all about it. I said, we want to bring them on too sooner or later because it's such an amazing story. And these are the kind of things that people don't know about. We hear about it, but don't actually know the story. So that was really interesting. So sooner or later, Deb and I will have them on, or Brandy. And hopefully it's a nice story.
Right. And then I don't know how many, if I'm
There's
correct, how many are living? I don't think there are many.
We said 2 with, there was 2 with us. I think that's about all that's left of the Buffalo Soldiers. What a story. I never knew the extent of it. I knew a little about it, but not the extent of what they've done through the years. And that goes back a long way to the Rough Riders.
Right. Mae, it's good, Mae, that you want to get these stories out because a lot of families, there are a lot of stories out there that no one has ever heard. And some may never be told. If there's no one to tell the story, then it won't be told. It just so happens that I was a journalist. So in putting together the book, that wasn't that difficult. Even though I was more in broadcast, I also had to study print. But every time I talk to people, I said, please remember at Thanksgiving, when you're with your family, especially your older members, but even like your own parents, take these cell phones that have audio and record the stories around the table about your family, because there are stories out there that no one will ever know. At least let your family know what you have done in life that no one will ever hear if it's not presented.
That's true. And that's we had the Postal Directory Battalion, the 688.
I saw that. I was watching that.
Amazing.
Yeah. So movies. I think the movie's coming out any day.
December.
Right. So 2020. I always have to say 2024. December 2024. It's coming out. Hopefully, people keep asking about. Is there going to be a movie about the nurses? I don't know.
Well, I have a couple more questions. Go ahead, Mae.
But thanks, Pia. They were very fortunate to have you to bring their story out.
Yes. And do you know what happened to these women after the military? You said you did interview some.
Yes. All right. My mother, when she was in the military, she was trained because some of the nurses could be trained in different aspects of nursing, and she was interested in a psychiatry. So they sent her to St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C., which was at that time, was a federal hospital. And after she retired left the military 10 years later, they hired her. She retired from St. Elizabeth's Hospital as a nurse.
Oh, that's great.
She was a psychiatric nurse. The other some of them, some of them. Let's see, the nurses, they got married. Some of them married Tuskegee Airmen or men who worked on that base. Let's see. I know that most of them, I believe, either a few of them remained in the military or civilian nursing afterwards. So as far as I know, and then or nurse training. I know one of the nurses who went to school with my mother in Richmond. I was looking at a yearbook, and she became an instructor at her alma mater. Wow. So the fact that an African American woman was going to be there as part of the instructors. So you see that it looked like most of them remained either in the military, especially Della Rainey. I believe she was a major when she came out of the military, but they either remained in the military, they got married, they went into other fields or education, or still in civilian hospitals or military hospitals.
So would you say some of them broke the glass ceiling as far as being able to work in a hospital with white people, or were they always working in hospitals with African American patients?
Well, what happened before integration in the military, which what was that, 1948, when the president opened up the door for that, but we still had resistance. So I interviewed a Black nurse, talked to her, and she was almost in tears. Now, this is in 2011. I attended the Tuskegee Airmen convention, which was held in Maryland, where I was living. That worked out well. And so she was almost in tears when she said that these women, and she was a military nurse, that these women opened the door for her to come in. And as a result, see, Black nurses couldn't even be in civilian hospitals. So by this time, there was an organization called the National Association of Colored Graduate Nurses. They were the lobbying group to try to get Black nurses into civilian hospitals, white civilian hospitals. So, excuse me, let me just do my little tea drink. So by this time, now nurses could serve anybody. But if you talk to nurses, there were probably still some vestiges of discrimination over the years. And you know what? There probably is still some even today.
Agreed.
So, it was a hard time. And when you asked me, why they may not have, shared their story, like I said, it might have been too much pain to have to go back to that period of time when they lived and what was going on in the country at that time.
Mae, do you have any more questions?
Go ahead, Deb. I'm sorry.
No, I wanted to ask you, do you have any more questions before I do a commercial for the book?
I do. Maybe I missed this, Pia, but did the women get military benefits? Did they have? Did the military give them the benefits the same as the men?
You know what? As nurses, whether they were white or Black, they probably didn't get exactly like what the men got. But what I think happened, like when my mother, when she died or left, she was a veteran. So she did receive veteran benefits. And so eventually, I think everybody, the white nurses, the Black nurses, everybody, got the benefits that they deserve. However, even though the nurses were considered in the Army Nurse Corps, the Black nurses, I think because they were segregated, it's not like they were in the regular Army Nurse Corps. They had the same, they went in as lieutenants. But like I said, they could only serve Black personnel, military personnel, German prisoners, or Italian prisoners. So they were kind of limited in what they could do. But as a result of the, the presidential, whatever it's called, I forgot, in 48, that it opened up the door for them at that time. So yes, Mae, they were getting something.
Is there? Go ahead, Mae.
I think you need a commercial, Deb.
Well, first I want Pia to. What else would you like us to come away from this podcast with?
Well, I would want everyone listening, no matter if you're African American, Caucasian, European American, any place in the country, to get with your family members to talk about your history. Now, history might not be pretty. It might be some things in your family that are embarrassing, but it's good to know. What was it? Winston Churchill and someone else was saying, if you don't know history, you're apt to make mistakes, the same mistakes over again. So we learn from our history. We learn. And so even within families, finding out like your medical history, what your family did growing up, it's important. And especially for young people and old people, they need to share their stories. And so that others can benefit from those stories.
Very true. So if anybody wants to read or buy the book, Memories of a Tuskegee Airman, Nurses and Her Military Sisters. That's a mouthful.
But yeah, I had a different subject, but
there you go.
The press, the publisher had a different idea.
Yes, they do, don't they? You can do so at your local library, on Amazon, through your local bookstore, or at ugapress.org. So I know I'm going to get the book, because now you got me wanting to know about your interviews. Yeah. For sure. So thank you very much for coming on.
And thank you for having me. And you all I'm encouraging you to keep these stories alive, because you may be the only ones doing so.
Well, it's important. When I was growing up, I didn't know what prejudice was until I moved east, or not so much on the West Coast, but the East Coast. I know it's amazing how people dislike this person for some reason. I just think it's terrible. Why can't we have peace on earth? And like President Truman said after World War II, he said, we've won the war, but we haven't won the peace. And I think our world seems to be more ignited, is a word, I guess, now than ever before.
That's true. Pia, thank you so much for sharing your stories.
You're welcome.
And we'll see you after this podcast.
And good luck to you.
So, Mae, I really enjoyed that. I learned a lot. We always learn a lot.
I know, and I had questions, but you answered them before I even asked them. It was wonderful.
I didn't even have to read mine. She's good. You can tell she's into journalism. She knows how to do this.
I wondered how one of the things I kept wondering was, how did she begin to write, or what made her write, or how was she talented? But she told that before I asked it, There
you go.
It's amazing.
So another good podcast under our belts.
That's true. Very interesting. Very good. Yep. Everybody should listen to these stories. They're so important.
And we'll keep telling them as long as you want to, Mae. As long as you want to.
I will. We got a lot more coming up. So
yes, we do.
So many people. that there's so many people that should have their stories told. If they reach out to us, it would be nice too. But most of them, people that we either experienced or know, which is nice.
True. Okay, so Mae, shall we power up and say goodbye to our audience?
And yes, we shall. Power up, Deb.
Power up, everybody. Be kind to one another. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.